Take a moment to settle in. Let the day slip softly into the background. You're here now, with nothing to do but listen. This is a story meant not to stir you, but to calm you, to slow your thoughts, to ease you gently into rest. Imagine the hush of wind over sand, the steady clip of hooves on a packed dirt road, and the distant glow of torchlight on stone walls. We are going back over 2,500 years to a time when the world was quieter in some ways and grander in others. This is not a tale of conquest or bloodshed. It's a story of balance, of stillness, of a remarkable empire that spanned continents, yet ruled with surprising calm. The Persian Empire, also called the Achaemenid Empire, began in the 6th century BCE. Its birth wasn't the result of sudden explosion, but of steady expansion. It was founded by a man named Cyrus the Great, who would build a model for leadership unlike many that came before him. At its height, the empire stretched from the edge of the Aegean Sea in the west to the banks of the Indus River in the east. It covered parts of modern-day Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even northern India. With over 5,000 kilometers of connected territory, it was one of the largest empires in human history. And yet for most of its time, it wasn't marked by chaos. It was marked by peace. This peace didn't happen by chance. It was designed, deliberately, patiently, through systems that were ahead of their time. The empire was divided into provinces. It used roads to stitch distant cities together. It allowed many cultures to keep their own languages, gods, and customs, so long as they remained loyal. It built trust, not just temples, order, not just armies. Before we explore those systems, let's return to its beginning, to a moment before maps were drawn, before stone capitals were raised, to a boy from the region of Persis, born into a world of tribes and shifting loyalties. Cyrus wasn't a brute. He wasn't loud. He didn't build his reputation on cruelty. Instead, he built relationships. He negotiated. He absorbed kingdoms not by erasing their people, but by respecting them. He united the Medes and the Persians first, then expanded outward, one steady step at a time. When he conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, he didn't sack the city. He entered it peacefully. Its people welcomed him. He freed enslaved populations. He allowed exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This was unheard of at the time. It earned him respect, even admiration, across cultures and centuries. The Cyrus cylinder, a small clay artifact inscribed in cuneiform, speaks of his tolerance and vision. Some historians call it the first declaration of human rights. Whether or not that label is perfectly accurate, its message is undeniable. Cyrus believed an empire could be strong without being cruel. He ruled not through fear, but through policy, through infrastructure, through consistency, and it worked. Cyrus ruled until his death in battle in 530 BCE. He was buried in a modest stone tomb at Pasargadae, his capital. The tomb still stands today, worn by time and wind, but intact, simple, quiet, a monument not to glory, but to stability. The foundation had been laid, and those who followed Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, and others would take that foundation and build upon it, brick by careful brick. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how they did it, how a massive empire kept itself from cracking, how its roads, governors, scribes, and beliefs worked in quiet harmony, and how its people, farmers, traders, messengers, and priests lived under the broad shelter of Persian peace. But for now, breathe easy. There's nothing more to do. Just let the soft rhythms of history carry you, one calm step at a time. To understand how the Persian Empire remained so peaceful, we must understand how it was built. Not with speed or recklessness, but with steady, deliberate expansion under a vision that favored order over domination. After Cyrus the Great passed, that vision did not disappear. It was carried forward, most notably by Darius I, also known as Darius the Great, who reigned from 522 to 486 BCE. Darius wasn't born into kingship. He came to power during a time of unrest following the death of Cyrus's son. His ascent wasn't smooth, but once he took the throne, he brought clarity and structure where there had been confusion. His legacy was not one of conquest, though he did expand the empire further, but one of organization. He took the ideals planted by Cyrus and rooted them deeply in a system that could last. One of his most influential decisions was to divide the empire into satrapies, provinces, each governed by a satrap. These satraps were chosen carefully. Some were members of Persian noble families, others were trusted local elites. They were familiar with the regions they governed and respected by the people. Each satrap was responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining local peace, and upholding royal laws. But importantly, no satrap was left unchecked. Darius created a system of oversight. He appointed royal secretaries who watched the satraps and military commanders who operated independently from them. The king also sent agents, often called the king's eyes and ears, to inspect the provinces without warning. These inspectors reported directly to the king, ensuring that no regional leader grew too powerful or corrupt. The checks and balances within the satrapy system made rebellion rare. Satraps could not easily build personal armies or hide their actions from the central government. Yet at the same time, they were given enough autonomy to govern effectively. They understood local traditions, spoke the local languages, and could settle disputes before they grew into unrest. This decentralized trust allowed the empire to function without constant intervention from the capital. This balance between central authority and local control was essential. The Persian Empire wasn't a monolith. It was a mosaic of cultures: Lydians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Elamites, Medes, Jews, and many more. Each group had its own traditions, gods, languages, and laws. Instead of trying to erase this diversity, the Persian administration let it thrive. As long as subjects remained peaceful and paid tribute, they were largely left alone. They could worship as they chose. They could speak their native tongues. They could celebrate their own festivals and maintain their own customs. In return, they recognized the authority of the king and the unity of the empire. This tolerance wasn't passive. It was carefully cultivated. Darius funded the rebuilding of temples, supported local priesthoods, and even had royal decrees translated into different languages to be understood by every province. His actions told the people, "You belong here." And that sense of belonging bred peace. The people did not feel conquered, they felt included. And inclusion made rebellion seem unnecessary. Darius also strengthened the empire through law and infrastructure, which we'll explore in more depth later. But his greatest contribution was perhaps his ability to shape a structure that could endure. A structure built not on fear, but on consistency. Not on force, but on trust. When we imagine an empire, we often picture armies and walls. But the Persian Empire, under Cyrus and Darius, built something more enduring, a system, one that could stretch, bend, and absorb the weight of difference without breaking. In the next chapter, we'll explore the roads that connected all of this, how the royal road and other paths allowed messages, trade, and people to move smoothly across this enormous land, making the empire feel not distant, but woven together like a soft tapestry. If the satraps were the arms of the empire, then the roads were its arteries, quiet, reliable, and always in motion. Without them, the Persian Empire would have fractured under its own weight. But with them, the empire became something unique, a place where people and information could move quickly, safely, and peacefully over thousands of miles. The most famous of these roads was the Royal Road, which stretched from Susa, the administrative centre in Persia, all the way to Sardis, near the Aegean Sea. It ran over 1,500 miles, through cities, mountains, rivers, and fields. For many, it was more than a route. It was a lifeline. Darius I oversaw the expansion and improvement of this network. He understood that an empire is only as strong as its ability to communicate, and so he invested not in monuments or palaces, but in infrastructure. The Royal Road wasn't the only route. Dozens of other roads branched out from it, forming a web that connected the entire empire, from Egypt to India, from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. The roads weren't paved with stone like Roman roads would later be, but they were carefully graded, well maintained, and closely watched. Every few miles there were rest stations, places where travellers and messengers could eat, sleep, and swap out tired horses. These stops were simple but clean: a shaded courtyard, a stone bench, a pitcher of water, quiet necessities for a journey measured in weeks, not hours. The most important travellers on these roads were the couriers, members of the Angarium, the imperial postal service. These riders didn't travel alone. They operated in relays, with fresh horses waiting at each station. In this way, a message could be delivered across the empire in a matter of days. Herodotus marvelled at their speed and dedication, writing that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night could stop them. A sentiment still echoed in postal mottos today. But the roads weren't just for messages. They carried goods. They carried people. They carried culture. A caravan might begin its journey in India, carrying spices, fabrics, and gems. Weeks later, it might pass through Susa, then Persepolis, then onward to Lydia, where Greek merchants waited with olive oil, ceramics, and silver. Along the way, stories would be shared, food exchanged, languages mixed. The road was a place of blending, not just travel. Safety on these roads was critical. Guards were stationed at key points. Patrols kept an eye on movement. The empire understood that people would only use the roads if they felt protected. And so the roads became trusted spaces, predictable, open, and steady. They also allowed the king to remain in control. Orders could be issued from the capital and reach distant satraps in days. Reports could return just as quickly. Rebellions could be quelled before they spread. Supplies could be delivered where needed. The roads didn't just connect places, they connected power, and they helped create something even rarer: a sense of closeness in an empire too large to see all at once. A trader in Egypt and a farmer in Bactria might never meet, but they were bound by the same system, by the same road. In the next chapter, we'll explore the way the Persian Empire managed one of the most difficult challenges of ruling a diverse land: religion. We'll see how the empire allowed gods and beliefs to coexist, not in conflict, but in quiet harmony, a spiritual peace to match the political one. To truly understand Persian peace, we must look at one of its most quietly revolutionary ideas: religious tolerance. While many ancient empires demanded spiritual conformity or imposed their gods through force, the Persian Empire took a different path, one that allowed many faiths to coexist, side by side within the same borders. The Persian state religion was Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, likely centuries before the empire was established. Zoroastrianism centered on the god Ahura Mazda, the source of all truth, order, and light. The religion emphasized ethical behavior, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and viewed life as a struggle between truth and falsehood. Under Darius I, Zoroastrianism became more prominent in royal inscriptions, but it was never forced on the population. The Persian kings did not destroy temples of foreign gods. They did not outlaw local rituals. They did not demand that their subjects abandon their ancestral beliefs. Instead, they made space. In Babylon, the great temples of Marduk remained intact. In Egypt, Persian rulers respected the priesthoods and continued traditional ceremonies. In Judea, Cyrus allowed the exiled Jewish people to return and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. A gesture so significant that the Hebrew Bible refers to him as a chosen instrument of God. This approach wasn't just kind, it was strategic. By letting people worship freely, the empire reduced resistance. Religious leaders were not threatened. Festivals continued as usual. Sacred texts were preserved. And because the empire didn't attack people's gods, it didn't attack their identities. This policy created a kind of spiritual stability. People could belong to the empire without giving up who they were. They could walk the same roads, use the same currency, follow the same laws, while praying in different temples. This didn't mean religion had no place in governance. In fact, it often played a quiet, supportive role. Royal decrees might invoke Ahura Mazda, but they were careful not to insult other beliefs. Temples received funding and protection. Priests were often involved in local administration. The empire didn't just tolerate religion, it integrated it gently into its rhythm. Zoroastrianism itself was not aggressive. Its rituals involved fire altars, where sacred flames were kept burning, symbolizing the presence of truth and order. Its prayers focused on moral choices. There were no forced conversions, no crusades. It was a religion of balance, much like the empire itself. In the countryside, people honored nature spirits, fertility deities, ancestral gods. In cities, temples bustled with offerings and chants. In remote valleys, cave sanctuaries still flickered with candlelight. And all of it, every practice and prayer, was allowed to continue under the shelter of Persian rule. This wasn't indifference, it was respect. And that respect built loyalty. When people feel seen, they resist less. When they feel their beliefs are safe, they are more likely to cooperate. And so, religion became not a source of division, but a quiet bridge between communities. In the next chapter, we'll leave the temples and step into one of the empire's greatest symbols of calm governance, Persepolis. A city built not for defense, but for ceremony, a capital of stone and silence, where unity was carved into every wall. Tucked against the mountains of southwestern Persia, there stood a city unlike any other, Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. It wasn't built for war, it wasn't chosen for trade. It was constructed slowly and deliberately as a place of quiet grandeur, designed to reflect the empire's philosophy of peace through order. Construction began under Darius I around 518 BCE, and it continued for nearly a century. Built on a large stone platform carved into a hillside, Persepolis rose from the earth like a vision. Wide terraces supported tall colonnades. Stone staircases led to gates guarded by massive carved figures, winged bulls and lion-headed creatures that looked outward, not to intimidate, but to inspire. Visitors entered through the gate of all nations, a name that perfectly captured the spirit of the place. People from every corner of the empire, Lydians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians would pass through those gates, not as conquered enemies, but as participants in a shared peace. The centerpiece of Persepolis was the Apadana, a vast audience hall supported by 72 columns, each rising nearly 20 meters into the air. Along the walls were detailed carvings, not of war, but of tribute. Delegations from across the empire were shown carrying gifts, textiles, animals, baskets of fruit, fine pottery, and carefully carved vessels. Each group was depicted with their own clothes, hairstyles, and symbols of identity. Nothing was erased, everything was included. The art of Persepolis did not glorify the king as a conqueror. It showed him seated calmly, receiving visitors, listening. The message was clear. The king was not the source of violence, but the keeper of balance. This city came alive during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox. Delegations from all provinces would arrive at Persepolis bearing tribute and participating in formal ceremonies. There were no public executions, no forced displays, just a carefully timed procession that honored difference and displayed unity. Yet for all its elegance, Persepolis was not a place of comfort. It wasn't filled with luxury or opulence. It was a place of discipline, stone surfaces, symmetrical layouts, and a quiet order to every room. It reflected the empire itself, restrained, structured, deeply intentional. Beneath the beauty, there was administration. The Persepolis fortification tablets discovered centuries later revealed a world of practical management. These clay tablets recorded rations of grain and wine, payments to workers, and allocations to travelers. The empire paid attention to detail. It counted what mattered, not just gold, but food, labor, travel, and family. People were paid for their work, women and men, adults and children. They received oil, bread, wine, and livestock as compensation. Their names were recorded, their roles acknowledged. This was not a chaotic kingdom. It was a finely tuned system, one that remembered its workers and honored their labor. Even in its architecture, Persepolis encouraged calm. The halls were tall and open, letting in light and breeze. The stones were pale and cool to the touch. Shadows moved slowly across the floors. Time felt less rushed here, more like a rhythm than a race. And though the city was ultimately burned by Alexander the Great, its legacy remains, not in ashes, but in stone. The quiet, careful carvings that show a world once held together not by fire, but by trust. In the next chapter, we'll leave the capitals and walk among the people, farmers, artisans, and villagers who lived ordinary lives under Persian rule. We'll explore how the rhythms of daily life were shaped by peace, and what it meant to wake each morning in an empire that simply worked. Not everyone in the Persian Empire lived in palaces or walked its famous roads. Most people, ordinary men and women, lived in small villages or quiet towns where life was shaped by the rhythms of the land and the soft weight of tradition. These were the people who made up the true heart of the empire. And for them, peace wasn't a political idea. It was a feeling. Imagine a farmer in the region of Media. He wakes with the sun, its light pouring softly over the foothills. His home is made of mud brick, cool in summer, warm in winter. Chickens rustle in a corner of the yard. A clay pot filled with water rests by the doorway. There is no rush. The days are long and measured. He steps into the fields where barley and wheat have been planted. The soil is dry, but canals from a nearby stream keep it nourished. The irrigation system is simple but steady, maintained by the community and approved by local administrators. Everyone knows when the water comes. Everyone respects the turn. In town, the baker rises early to prepare flatbreads. A potter works clay into bowls. A weaver threads wool through a loom. Life is quiet, predictable. Children run between buildings, helping with chores, learning the tools of the trade by watching, imitating, repeating. Markets open slowly. A trader from the next village arrives with honey. Another brings herbs. There's no shouting, no chaos. Just voices softened by routine and trust. Prices are agreed upon with nods. Goods are exchanged by hand. Persian law required taxes, yes, but they were collected fairly at regular intervals. And those taxes, when paid, meant the roads were maintained, the temples protected, and peace preserved. Villagers knew about the satrap, the governor who watched over the province. They may never have seen him, but they knew his agents passed through occasionally. A messenger might arrive to read a decree. A scribe might update the village census. But no soldiers marched in unless there was a threat. And most of the time, there wasn't. Peace meant people didn't have to look over their shoulders. They could plant seeds in spring and trust they'd harvest in autumn. They could build homes without fear of destruction. They could raise families, tell stories, and pass on traditions. And these weren't just Persian families. The empire was filled with cultural threads. Greeks in the west, Elamites in the east, Babylonians, Jews, Egyptians, Medes, and more. The daily rituals varied, but the rhythm was familiar. Wake, work, rest, repeat. Women in many regions held quiet power. In the administrative tablets of Persepolis, women are recorded as labor supervisors, landholders, and heads of households. They received rations. They hired workers. They managed supplies. Their names were written in the records, not erased. Religious life blended easily into daily life. People visited shrines, tended small altars, offered prayers or food to their gods. Festivals were held with music, dancing, shared meals. There was no one faith forced upon all. Each region celebrated its seasons in its own way. What held all of this together was trust in continuity. The empire gave people the sense that tomorrow would be much like today, and that was all most people ever wanted. In the next chapter, we'll explore the traders, caravan leaders, and messengers who moved between these towns and cities, carrying goods, news, and stories along the empire's peaceful veins. Some people in the Persian Empire stayed rooted to one place, their village, their craft, their fields. But others lived in motion. Traders, messengers, and caravan leaders spent their days on the road, passing through towns, across rivers, and between provinces. They were the threads that tied the empire together, stitching the quiet corners into a single, gently humming whole. A typical caravan might include 20 or more animals, donkeys, horses, and camels, each carrying packs of fabric, ceramics, dried fruit, spices, or tools. The traders leading them walked slowly, wrapped in loose garments, hats pulled low against the sun. They followed well-worn routes, stopping each night at caravanserais, safe rest stations placed strategically along the empire's roads. These roadside inns weren't luxurious, but they offered food, water, and shelter. There were stalls for animals, pots of warm stew, and flat roofs where travelers could sleep under the stars. It wasn't comfort that mattered. It was consistency. The knowledge that one could travel hundreds of miles and always find a safe place to stop. Goods weren't the only things that traveled. Ideas moved with the traders. A potter from Lydia might learn a new glaze from a craftsman in Bactria. A baker in Susa might adopt a recipe from a merchant in Egypt. Languages blended. Songs traveled. The roads weren't just paths, they were classrooms, shared stories in motion. And then there were the messengers. The Persian courier system, the Angarium, was one of the most advanced in the ancient world. Riders travelled in relays, changing horses at regular intervals. These messengers could carry royal decrees, updates, warnings, or simple notices from one end of the empire to the other in just over a week. The system was so reliable that Herodotus praised it centuries later. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night prevents them from completing their appointed course. These messengers were protected by law. No one could delay them. No one could harm them. They travelled with the quiet weight of imperial trust. When they entered a village, people stopped what they were doing to listen. News was rare, and it travelled softly, wrapped in scrolls and sealed with clay. Some travellers walked for religious reasons. Pilgrims made their way to temples or holy sites. They weren't rushed. They carried their offerings wrapped in cloth or stored in baskets. Some fasted along the road. Others stopped to pray beneath trees or beside streams. No one hurried them. No one stopped them. Faith moved freely across the empire. Even foreigners travelled the Persian roads. Envoys from Greece, Egypt, or India passed through the same stations, used the same currency, and followed the same posted distances. The empire welcomed guests, especially those who came in peace. They didn't need to know Persian law to be treated fairly. The structure took care of them. The roads carried more than goods and people. They carried reliability. A merchant could send his goods ahead and know they'd arrive. A family could write to relatives far away and expect a reply. This was unusual for the time, but in Persia, it was simply how things worked. And through all of this movement, slow, steady, untroubled, the empire remained peaceful, because the people who moved between places carried not just cargo or messages, they carried trust. In the next chapter, we'll explore the written systems that backed this movement, how tablets, scrolls, seals and scribes helped build a culture of accountability, and why paperwork was one of Persia's quietest tools for peace. Beneath the roads and the governors, behind the temples and trade, there existed another layer of the Persian Empire, quieter but just as essential. This was the world of records, of scribes, seals, scrolls, and tablets. It wasn't as dramatic as a battle or as visible as a royal court, but it was here, in the dust of archives and the grooves of clay, that Persian peace found its rhythm. The empire was vast, and to manage it, the Persians relied on administration. That meant documentation, careful, constant, consistent. Everything was recorded. Every ration, every worker, every shipment of grain. Nothing was too small to be noted. At the heart of this system were the scribes. They worked in silence, seated at wooden desks or crouched on floor mats. Their tools were simple: styluses made of reed or bone, clay tablets, and wax-covered boards. In some regions, parchment or papyrus was used. In others, stone carvings preserved the most important decrees. Languages varied. Aramaic was common for everyday use. Elamite and Old Persian appeared in royal inscriptions. Cuneiform was still used in Babylon. The scribes didn't just write, they organized. They tracked who received what, when, and why. They recorded the wages given to workers in Persepolis. They counted livestock, issued receipts, filed complaints, and copied contracts. Their work allowed the empire to function like a machine, even across immense distances. Perhaps the most famous example of Persian record-keeping is the Persepolis fortification tablets. Tens of thousands of clay tablets discovered at the site of the ceremonial capital. These tablets list food rations distributed to workers, including women and children. They show that labor was compensated fairly, that families were supported, that someone, somewhere, had taken the time to remember. Each tablet was sealed with a clay stamp or a carved cylinder seal, pressed into the surface to verify its origin. The seals were miniature artworks, tiny animals, figures, or patterns unique to the official who used them. These seals served as signatures, and they held real authority. A message with a broken seal was treated with suspicion. A message with the right seal was law. Beyond economics, written records were used to settle disputes. When land boundaries were challenged or inheritance questioned, officials consulted the archives. A scratched tablet or frayed scroll might determine the outcome of a case. This prevented arguments from turning violent. The law had a memory. Justice didn't rely on memory or hearsay. It relied on writing. Scribes also worked closely with the satraps and royal messengers. Every order issued by the king had to be copied, translated if needed, and delivered accurately. Mistakes could lead to confusion, or worse. So the work was done carefully, often checked by more than one person. Peace, it turned out, was as much about clarity as it was about kindness. Even temples maintained archives. Religious institutions held land, collected offerings, and employed workers. They too needed records. Priests might write daily expenses or track the phases of the moon. Their scrolls joined the wider symphony of empire, quiet voices that added to the harmony. This system of writing and review helped maintain trust. People believed the empire would remember their service, their needs, their names. And when a society remembers its people, those people tend to live more peacefully. In the next chapter, we'll look more closely at how justice was handled, not with harsh spectacles or fear, but through process, fairness, and calm resolution. A system designed not to punish quickly, but to settle gently. Even the most peaceful empires need ways to resolve conflict. Disputes arise, mistakes are made, people feel wronged. But in the Persian Empire, justice was not loud or theatrical. It did not rely on fear. It moved slowly with purpose, through procedures shaped to reduce anger, not inflame it. The Persians approached justice with the same philosophy that guided their roads and satrapies: structure, clarity, and fairness. Legal matters were handled at multiple levels, beginning with local leaders. Village elders or town officials would often settle minor disputes. They knew the people involved, understood the customs, and could offer decisions that were rooted in context. If the problem was too large or too complex, it could be brought before higher authorities, regional judges appointed by the satrap, or even the satrap himself. These officials were expected to act impartially, and many had scribes record each step of the proceedings to avoid misunderstandings. The empire didn't use a single legal code across all territories. Instead, local laws and customs were often preserved. Babylonian law might govern one city, while Egyptian or Median traditions held sway elsewhere. This flexibility prevented unrest. People felt that their values still mattered, even under imperial rule. But this didn't mean there was no oversight. Royal inspectors travelled from province to province, checking on how laws were applied. If a satrap was abusing his power, or a judge was known to be corrupt, word would eventually reach the capital. And once it did, the consequences could be swift, but always documented, deliberate, and according to procedure. Punishments in the Persian Empire varied, but they were often measured. Fines, compensations, and public apologies were preferred over harsh penalties. Property disputes might result in land redistribution or shared usage agreements. Theft could be repaid with goods or labor. Only in cases of treason, rebellion, or severe violence would capital punishment be considered, and even then, it was rare and regulated. False accusations were taken seriously. Someone who knowingly brought a dishonest claim might face the same punishment that would have been given to the accused. This discouraged rash accusations and encouraged truth. One of the most impressive aspects of Persian justice was its record keeping. As discussed earlier, every case was written down, witnesses were named, agreements were sealed. These documents became part of the empire's memory. If a similar case arose later, scribes could look back for precedent. In this way, the legal system became more than a tool. It became a tradition of settling, not escalating. Religious figures sometimes played a role in justice, especially in local contexts. Priests or elders might mediate disagreements, offering solutions grounded in shared beliefs. Their involvement added a layer of moral weight to the law, blending ethics with administration. Even the king was subject to expectations. He was not above the law. His actions were recorded. His decisions were scrutinized. If he favored mercy, that became an example for the satraps. If he ruled with fairness, it rippled outward. Royal inscriptions often included language about justice, not vengeance, but balance. The king as shepherd, not as tyrant. And people believed in the system because it wasn't sudden, it wasn't arbitrary. It gave them a voice, it gave them a path. In the next chapter, we'll meet one of the empire's most important architects of peace, Darius the Great, and explore how his reforms helped create an empire not just of power, but of purpose. If Cyrus the Great built the foundation of the Persian Empire, it was Darius the First, often called Darius the Great, who constructed its frame. His reign, which began in 522 BCE, marked a turning point, the shift from rapid expansion to careful organization. He didn't just want to rule an empire, he wanted to make it last. Darius took power during a time of unrest. Several provinces had rebelled after the death of Cambyses, Cyrus's son, but Darius, through both military skill and diplomacy, restored unity. Then, rather than seeking more conquest, he turned inward toward governance. His first great achievement was standardization. He introduced a new system of coinage, including the famous gold daric, which became the empire's standard currency. Prior to this, trade often relied on bartering or inconsistent local coinage. With the daric, merchants could travel freely from India to Lydia, confident in the value of their money. It encouraged commerce and smoothed interactions between distant lands. Next, he tackled taxation. Instead of demanding unpredictable tribute, Darius assigned each satrapy a fixed amount, based on its wealth and resources. These quotas were fair and transparent. Satraps collected taxes in silver, gold, grain, livestock, or goods. The revenue supported roads, defences, public works, and the royal court. More importantly, the system reduced resentment. People could prepare for what they owed. No surprises, no last-minute demands. To enforce this structure, Darius improved the administrative hierarchy. Each satrap had military commanders, record keepers, and inspectors who answered not to him, but directly to the king. These overlapping roles prevented corruption and ensured that no single official could act without accountability. He also invested deeply in infrastructure. Darius extended and repaired roads, ordered new bridges to be built across major rivers, and improved irrigation systems for agriculture. These public works didn't just benefit the empire, they improved daily life for the people within it. One of his most visible legacies was the continued construction of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital. Under Darius, new palaces and halls were added. Stone reliefs depicted peaceful processions and respectful tribute, not war. The very artwork of the empire reflected its ideals. Darius also ensured the empire could communicate across its many cultures. His royal inscriptions, like the famous Behistun inscription, were carved in multiple languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, so that more people could understand them. He didn't speak only to Persians. He spoke to everyone. Religion remained a gentle thread through his reign. Though Zoroastrianism influenced his court, he didn't suppress other beliefs. He continued the policies of Cyrus, funding temple restorations, respecting local deities, and allowing people to worship in peace. Through these reforms, Darius created a sense of predictability. Life under his rule felt organized, governed, trustworthy. People paid what they owed, worked their lands, traded with confidence, and traveled without fear. They weren't waiting for the next crisis. They were living with a steady horizon. And that is what made his leadership so powerful. He didn't just hold the empire together. He made it feel intact, not as a patchwork of provinces, but as a single body moving in rhythm. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this rhythm extended into culture and communication, how language, literacy, and shared symbols helped make a diverse empire feel like one. To govern an empire as vast and varied as Persia, it wasn't enough to build roads or collect taxes. People had to understand each other, to read the same messages, follow the same rules, and speak across distance and difference. That's why the Persian Empire placed such quiet, consistent value on language and literacy. The empire spanned dozens of ethnic groups and languages. In Babylon, people spoke Akkadian. In Egypt, they wrote in hieroglyphs. In Elam, they used their own script. Persia itself introduced Old Persian cuneiform for royal inscriptions. Yet the glue that held the empire together was a language not born in Persia at all: Aramaic. Originally from Syria, Aramaic became the common tongue of the Persian bureaucracy. It was easy to learn, flexible, and already in use across much of the Near East. The empire adopted it not by decree, but by practicality. Scribes in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Bactria all began using Aramaic to write official documents. It became the quiet thread of imperial administration. When a royal order was sent out, it was translated. Scrolls might be issued in multiple languages, depending on the province. The king didn't assume everyone spoke Persian. He made sure his words were understood. This multilingual policy wasn't just kind, it was smart governance. It allowed people to feel included, to read laws, to respond, to participate. Scribes were the key to this system. They were trained from a young age in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Some learned multiple scripts: cuneiform, Aramaic, hieroglyphs, and served as translators or record keepers for courts and temples. Their work ensured that contracts were clear, taxes recorded properly, and disputes settled with written proof. Education, while not widespread, existed in small centres, especially around temples. Children of officials or priests might study texts, copy documents, or learn to calculate harvests and trade. Knowledge wasn't forced on people. It flowed quietly, expanding from the cities to the towns, from the temples to the markets. Writing also served as a symbol of unity. Royal inscriptions were placed on rocks, walls, and tablets across the empire. The Behistun inscription, carved into a cliff in modern-day Iran, is a prime example. Commissioned by Darius, it told the story of his rise to power, and it was written in 3 scripts so more people could read it. This act of multilingual writing sent a message. The empire saw its people. It didn't demand they erase their identity. It invited them to be part of something larger. Even seals, those small carved stones used to stamp official documents, were personalized. A merchant might have a lion on his seal, a priest, a star. These symbols traveled with their owners, attached to scrolls and contracts, verifying both identity and intention. The result of all this was more than efficiency. It was confidence. When a farmer signed a contract, he trusted it would be honored. When a trader carried a permit, he knew it would be recognized in another city. The written word became a shield, a bridge, and a promise. Language, often overlooked in stories of empire, was one of Persia's strongest tools for peace. Because when people can read the same signs, understand the same messages, and speak with shared meaning, they don't feel like strangers. They feel like neighbors. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the empire marked time through festivals, seasons, and calendars, and how its understanding of the year brought structure and comfort to millions. In a peaceful empire, time moves with rhythm, not rushed, not fractured, just steady, like the slow arc of the sun across the sky or the patient change of seasons. The Persian Empire, vast as it was, understood the importance of organizing time, and so, across cities and villages, mountains and rivers, people lived by calendars that offered both structure and comfort. The Persians followed a solar calendar based on the movement of the sun, with 12 months of 30 days each. To align the calendar with the natural year, they added 5 additional days at the end of each cycle. These 5 days were known as epagomenal days, and they were treated as a kind of sacred pause, a space between endings and beginnings. The most important celebration of the year was Nowruz, the Persian New Year, held at the spring equinox. On this day, light and darkness were equal, and the world was thought to be in perfect balance. It was a time of cleansing, renewal, and hope. Across the empire, homes were swept clean. Clay pots were scrubbed. Old goods were burned or buried. People wore fresh clothes, lit oil lamps, and shared meals. Seeds were planted. Fires were kindled. The past was released, and the future quietly welcomed. Nowruz wasn't a spectacle. It was a soft celebration. A time for families to gather, for debts to be forgiven, for intentions to be reset. Even the king would mark the day with formal audiences and the receipt of gifts. The capital, Persepolis, would fill with dignitaries bearing tribute, not in fear, but in harmony. But Nowruz was only one part of the year's rhythm. Throughout the calendar, each region observed its own festivals tied to planting, harvest, or ancestral remembrance. In Babylon, the Akitu festival honored the renewal of kingship and the power of Marduk. In Egypt, festivals followed the rise and fall of the Nile. In Elam and Media, mountain rituals welcomed the changing seasons. The Persian administration didn't seek to suppress these traditions. It let them flourish. Local holidays were respected. Temple calendars were acknowledged. Communities were allowed to shape their own time, so long as they remained part of the empire's steady pulse. The months had names, the days had meanings, and the seasons carried both spiritual and practical weight. Farmers planted with the return of warmth. Shepherds moved flocks as grasses grew or withered. Merchants timed their routes to avoid snow or flooding. Time was not abstract, it was lived. Clocks, as we know them, didn't exist. But sundials, shadow markers, and water clocks helped people track the passage of hours. Temple priests recorded the movement of stars. Astronomers studied the heavens, not just to understand them, but to align civic and sacred life with the greater cosmos. even legal documents reference the calendar. A contract might state, on the 3rd day of the month of Thoth, or before the new moon of the 6th month. This attention to time helped ensure consistency and fairness. It told people not just what to do, but when. And time itself became part of the empire's peace. It didn't surprise. It didn't rush. It returned again and again, like footsteps on a familiar path. In the next chapter, we'll look back from the edge, asking what all of this meant, what Persia left behind, and what it teaches us, even now, about how structure, patience, and kindness can make empires not only survive, but feel like home. When we step back from the moving parts of the Persian Empire, the roads, the temples, the scrolls, and seals, what remains is something subtler, a feeling, a texture, the soft presence of trust woven through every corner of the realm. And that trust may be the greatest legacy of Persia's long peace. By the time of Darius and Xerxes, the empire had become a living network of expectations. Farmers expected their crops would be safe. Traders expected fair treatment on the road. Priests expected freedom to carry out their rituals, and almost always these expectations were met. This didn't mean the empire was perfect. There were rebellions, tensions, and mistakes. But what stands out in the historical record is how rarely the empire resorted to panic. Problems were addressed not with sweeping cruelty, but with calm procedural response. Rebellions were quelled, governors were replaced, roads were repaired, life resumed. What helped hold this balance was the Persian understanding that loyalty comes from stability, not terror. When people believe tomorrow will look like today, safe, familiar, respectful, they are less likely to resist. And the more they feel their identity is acknowledged, the more they see themselves as part of something bigger. The architecture of the empire supported this feeling. Persepolis was not a fortress. It was a palace of processions. Reliefs showed people in harmony, not chains. The Gate of All Nations wasn't just a name. It was an invitation. The visual language of the empire, the art, the inscriptions, the coins, avoided blood and conquest. Instead, it depicted kings in stillness, seated with dignity, holding flowers or scepters, not swords, not whips. That wasn't weakness. It was deliberate symbolism, power through serenity. Even the empire's enemies respected it. The Greeks, though often in conflict with Persia, borrowed ideas from its administration. Alexander the Great, after defeating the Persian army, chose not to destroy what he found. He adopted Persian dress. He married into Persian nobility. He preserved much of the bureaucracy. He understood what many others did. Persia had built something that worked. Centuries later, the systems of Persia would echo through other empires. The satrapy model inspired Roman provinces and Islamic caliphates. The courier system influenced medieval postal networks. And Zoroastrian values, truth, order, duality, would seep into other faiths and philosophies. But more than systems, Persia left behind an idea that diversity can coexist with unity, that peace doesn't require sameness, that power can be felt in consistency, not in spectacle. And that may be why the memory of Persia still feels soft, still human, still close. We imagine the past as noisy, full of wars, banners, shouting kings. But the Persian Empire reminds us there was also stillness. There was process. There were long days spent in markets and fields, and long nights passed beneath stars, with lamps flickering behind clay walls, and the gentle rustle of papyrus scrolls being unrolled by candlelight. That kind of history isn't written in blood. It's written in dust, in breath, in the quiet certainty that things will be okay. And sometimes, that's enough to hold the world together. If peace in the Persian Empire was made of trust and systems, it was also made of ordinary lives, repeated, dependable, and rooted in a sense of place. As we near the end of this story, it's worth slowing down to look again at the people who lived within the empire, not the kings or governors, but the citizens, subjects, and neighbours who quietly carried the empire forward, one day at a time. In a small village nestled near the Zagros Mountains, a family rises early. Smoke curls from the chimney. Bread is kneaded, shaped, and set beside a fire. The father checks the irrigation ditch, ensuring water still flows from the nearby stream. The mother prepares a basket of dates for the market. Children gather kindling, chase chickens, or peer at the sky to guess the weather. The pace is slow, predictable, safe. This family knows they owe a tax to the satrap. A portion of their harvest will be collected at the end of the season, but they also know the roads will remain open, that guards will watch the trade routes, that their fields will not be seized, that their gods are still honoured, their dialect still spoken. Further down the road, a potter works clay into vessels. Each bowl bears the curve of his hand. He stamps his mark on the base, knowing that someone, miles away, might someday hold it. His tools are simple: a wheel, a kiln. A quiet routine passed down from parent to child. At the edge of a river, a trader prepares his animals. He's bound for Susa with wool and dyed cloth. His journey will take weeks, but he's not afraid. He knows where to sleep. He knows what towns lie ahead. He carries a sealed scroll showing his goods have been registered. The guards will wave him through. All of them, farmer, potter, trader, live within a system that rarely demands attention. It simply functions. They don't wake in fear. They don't wonder if new laws will appear overnight. The empire doesn't scream, it hums. That hum carries into cities as well. In Babylon, scribes sit in shaded courtyards, copying records. In Memphis, a priest lights incense at a temple altar. In Persepolis, workers carve another relief along a palace wall, their tools tapping in rhythm. Everywhere, life continues, uninterrupted. Children grow up watching this. They learn when to plant, how to calculate a fair trade, how to speak their local tongue, and still understand the language of administration. They hear the names of the kings, but they feel the empire more in the daily rituals, the weight of a clay seal, the chime of coins, the way strangers nod on the road. This was Persia's most powerful accomplishment, making peace feel ordinary, not exceptional, not temporary, just expected. And when something is expected, people protect it. They cooperate. They stay. They invest in homes, in tools, in community, because they trust that tomorrow won't bring fire. It will bring the same sounds, the same steps, the same sky. In the final chapter, we'll return once more to the idea of legacy. What did the Persian Empire leave behind? Not in monuments or myths, but in the quiet way it taught the world that peace, when built with care, doesn't need to shout. It only needs to endure. The Persian Empire no longer stands. Its kings are long gone. Its cities lie in ruins, scattered across deserts and hillsides. The columns of Persepolis are worn by time. The scrolls have crumbled. The seals rest in museum drawers. But the spirit of what Persia built, the calmness, the care, the rhythm of its peace, still lingers. It lingers in the idea that strength can be quiet, that an empire need not roar to endure, that order doesn't always mean oppression. Sometimes it simply means knowing what to expect. Modern governments have borrowed from Persia more than they realize. Provinces, postal systems, fair taxation, multilingual administration, all echoes of what Cyrus and Darius shaped. Even today, people cite the Cyrus cylinder as one of the earliest expressions of human rights, a gesture that still feels modern in its gentleness. But legacies aren't only found in systems, they're found in memory, in the way people talk about a place, even centuries later. The Greeks remembered Persia not just as a rival, but as something vast and strangely admirable. Alexander didn't destroy everything. He adopted Persian customs. He saw the wisdom in what had been built. For those who lived within the empire, who walked its roads, paid its taxes, spoke their prayers, the legacy was simpler. It was consistency. A life where mornings came without fear, where crops were grown without dread, where a message could cross a continent and arrive still legible. It's easy to overlook that kind of peace. History often prefers the loud, the battles, the revolts, the kings who shouted. But Persian peace didn't shout. It persisted. It lingered in the language of scribes, in the patterns of trade, in the layout of temples and the schedules of markets, in the choice to translate rather than replace, to allow rather than erase. When people feel safe enough to sleep soundly, to plan next season's harvest, to teach their children a craft, something powerful is happening. It's not conquest, it's not glory, it's civilization. And that is what Persia offered. The empire eventually fell, as all empires do, but not because it failed its people. Rather, it became part of something else, absorbed, respected, remembered. And now, here in the quiet of your evening, that memory lives again, not as a lesson, but as a presence, a reminder that peace isn't a dream from another time. It's something we build, deliberately, slowly, together. You've walked now through palaces and pastures, through archives and altars, beside traders and kings, and all along the way the road was smooth, the voices calm, the hands steady. Rest now. The story is complete. The light has faded behind the hills, and the stars have taken their places overhead. You are safe. You are still. And peace, like the Persian Empire, endures in silence.